Welcome to Your Best Interviews. My name is Eric Smith. Thank you so much for spending the time with me. I know there's a lot of places you can go, so I appreciate you spending it here with me to talk about interview tips and the hiring process and how to get a leg up. So today what I want to talk about is just how to close an interview. I know I've done other videos about this, so check those out as well. The message is going to be pretty consistent, but I get this question a lot, and so I wanted to chat with you guys about what I would recommend as top tips for closing an interview. So the biggest thing is at the end of the interview, they're typically going to ask, what questions do you have, right? So they've spent the interview asking you questions, getting a better understanding of you as a candidate for their position, but then they're typically going to turn it around and say, what questions do you have for us? This is a chance for you to better understand the company, the culture, the role specifically. I have other videos on what questions you should be asking, so check that out because there are specific questions that you should be asking specific hiring managers or different interviewee personas. So check those out. But once you've gotten to you've asked your 2 or 3 questions about the company, the culture, or the position, how you want to wrap up your interview in these questions would be, one, you always want to ask for, what I would say the first question, so there's 2 kind of wrap-up questions that you should be asking. The first would be, ask if they have any hesitations around you as a candidate for their position. So this is a tougher question, but the benefit is that you're getting their objections up front, and it gives you a chance to respond to those and to overcome some of them. So what I typically ask is, I'll say, this has been really helpful. Another question I have is, so it's been great learning about the role. I really feel like I'm a great fit based on everything that we talked about. I think my background fits. I think I can hit the ground running and add a lot of, be a great asset to your team. But that said, I wanted to ask you, are there any questions or hesitations that you have right now after seeing my background, hearing some about my experience? Are there any hesitations that you have about me as a good fit for this role? It's a really straightforward question, and oftentimes what you're going to do is you're going to catch them off guard. They're not used to getting that direct question to them, and so some interviewers will say, "No, I don't think so," and they might just, that's their easy way of moving on. You can say, great, I just wanted to make sure because I really feel, and so if I can add color to any areas of my experience or resume that might be causing you hesitation, I would love to help clear those up or speak at greater length to those. What you're again doing is just you're asking them to give you objections or give you the reasons that they might not move you forward. What you're realistically going to end up getting from this is you're going to get them on the spot giving you their hesitations without them really necessarily wanting to. They might not want to, but because they're on the spot, they might just volunteer and say, the one thing I would say that's holding me up is I don't think you're real strong in this particular area of experience that we want. And then that's your time to jump in and overcome that objection. And so what I would always recommend is lead positively. Don't jump in and say like, oh, you're wrong on that. I do have a lot of experience. What you want to say, you want to jump in and say, I'm so glad you brought that up. And I apologize. This is my fault. I should have been more clear because that is actually an area that I have a lot of experience, or that is actually an area that I feel like is a real strength of mine. But maybe I didn't articulate that or convey that in the resume, and so that's on me. I'm glad you brought that up. I actually feel that I'm strong in that area because X, Y, and Z. So you have to be prepared on the spot to be able to answer some of those objections or overcome that objection. But the benefit there is you can overcome their hesitations and potentially move yourself forward in the process when otherwise you may have been disqualified from the process. An example of this for me is I applied to my very first job ever, which was a sales job at the company that I ended up working for 8 years. And when I originally applied, I was rejected for the role. I ended up reaching out and connecting with the recruiter and saying, hey, I just wanted to follow up on this position. I think I'm a great fit. I would love to connect. And on the spot, because I had her on the phone, she had mentioned, Yes, actually, we rejected your application because we felt like your sales experience wasn't strong enough. It gave me the opportunity to say, I'm so glad you brought that up. I actually am very strong in that, and that's where most of my previous experience comes from. And I was coming out of college, so I had college jobs, but I was able to overcome that by explaining my previous experience and how I did have sales embedded in what I was doing. And so I was really strong in all the areas that they were looking for. I just didn't write it down correctly in my resume. And just by explaining that for 2 minutes on the phone, the recruiter said, "Oh, it sounds like you do have that experience. That's not a concern of mine anymore." And they put me in the phone interview process, and then I ended up cruising through and getting that first job. But it's really easy for them to make a snap decision and say, they're not strong in this area, so they're a no. So what you're doing with that first question is saying, are there any hesitations that you have about my experience that I can add a little bit more color to eliminate any hesitations or doubts? They're likely gonna volunteer that because you're putting them on the spot, and it gives you the chance to say, I'm so glad you brought that up. That's my mistake. I'm actually very strong in that area, and so I'm glad that I'm able to kind of over-explain or explain further why I think I'm a fit and strong in that area. And then just give 2 or 3 points of why you are in fact strong in those areas that there are hesitations for them. Again, it's just going to improve your odds of moving forward in the process, which is the entire goal of asking this question and the entire goal of the interview process. And then the very last question, sorry guys, I'm rambling, the very last question. So that was your second to last question. This is your last question, is just follow up. What are the next steps? I'm very eager. What are the next steps? What should I expect from a timeline standpoint? Do you have an idea of what your hiring process looks like and when I should expect to hear back and what the next step might look like? What you're doing there is just understanding your follow-up points, when you should expect to hear back. And if you're in the interview process with multiple companies, this also helps you kind of plot out what your next steps are for each one of the companies that you're interviewing with. So always ask any hesitations that they have based on what they had heard. Try and overcome those right there in the moment. And then the very last question is just follow up. I'm very eager. What are the next steps? What should I expect from a timeline standpoint for reaching out and for the next step in the hiring process? Guys, those are the wrap-up questions to an interview that I would highly, highly recommend. It will improve your odds of moving forward in the process, which all of my advice is centered around that. Guys, thank you so much. Hit subscribe. I'm dropping 2 videos every week. All my advice is centered on helping you get the job that you want, getting a leg up, and moving forward in the interview process. Thanks so much, guys. Have a good one.